Hello, I'm George Napier, and welcome to my presentation. Today, we're going to talk about Kolb's experiential learning style and his learning style theories. We will begin by discussing the experiential learning theory. Please direct your attention to the cartoon below. You will notice two children tasked with building a model airplane. The girl on the left follows each step in a uniform fashion. The boy on the right has more or less a big picture idea. Their approach to the task might be changed by their worldview, how their minds are structured, the overall goal of the project, and each of their individual learning styles. David Kolb believed that all learning styles were the result of constructivism. Constructivism was founded by John Dewey as a new approach from the traditional and progressive learning theories, which stated that learning was either teacher or student driven. Dewey hypothesized that learning was a construction of experiences. Thus, constructivism is the theory of learning that the user creates personal learning outcomes through reflecting on previous experiences. As each learner has their own unique experiences, they create their own lens in which to assimilate new knowledge. Since constructivism is based on previous experiences, it is important to understand how we adopt knowledge. Below is Edgar Dale's cone of learning. This cone shows how doing an action helps to reinforce knowledge greater than simply reading about it. However, it fails to include emotional attachment to an activity. This is what makes constructivism so unique. As every person is different and experiences events differently, we learn the same tasks in a slightly different manner and attribute different emotions and ideas. For instance, I am quite fond of apples and the pies they feature so well in. My wife, however, is less fond of the fruit. She had a negative experience with a worm from an orchard and refuses to partake in apple pie. While this provides me with an extra helping of dessert, it also proves that we each learn and view the world differently based on our previous experiences. So who was David Kolb? David Kolb was born in 1939 and still lives today. He earned his PhD from Harvard University and published his theory of learning styles in 1984. His theories that we will soon discuss have been widely used. Although being controversial, they're still among the most popular of learning theories cited today. Kolb's theories may be looked at in three parts, all of which are based on a constructivist ideology. First are the principles which guide the theory. These are 6 assumptions of adult learning that Kolb relies on as a sort of framework. These are essential to the remaining pieces of the theory, as they help guide them. Second is the experiential learning theory itself. It involves 4 stages that learners progress through as they assimilate knowledge. We will discuss these steps and how you may use them in your classroom. Kolb said in his published work from 1984, "Learning is the process whereby knowledge is created through the transformation of experience." Finally, there are the learning styles. Kolb believed that there were 4 basic types of learners. We will discuss these learning styles, their implications, and how to tailor a project or assignment to each type of learner. Let's begin by looking at the learning principles. Kolb's work must be founded on these 6 principles. Learning as a process. Learning is relearning. Emotional reflection. Holistic learning. Environmental learning. And finally, constructivism. We will begin with learning as a process. Learning is a continuous process grounded in experience. Knowledge is continuously derived and tested out in experiences of the learner. It is best to assume learning is without end. Kolb doesn't believe in looking at learning in terms of outcomes. Instead, he believes, educators should focus on effectively improving the student's learning experience. Help scaffold information and try to enhance the student's grasp on the material. You can apply this in your classroom by constantly building on previous content and scaffolding your content. Start low with something small, perhaps if it's a math problem. Begin with the basics, and then slowly work your way up. After all, you wouldn't do trigonometry before algebra. Learning is relearning. This is the idea that students' ideas must be drawn out, discussed, and refined. The purpose of this is to set a foundation of knowledge that can be continuously improved upon. For instance, I enjoy painting in my free time, but I am constantly trying new things to find shortcuts and improve the quality of my brushstrokes. In essence, I am relearning how to apply my brush to the canvas every time I sit down at the easel. You may do something similar in your own life. Perhaps you learned to make coffee or tea differently. Perhaps you learned a new trick on your computer today. This principle is important and part of our everyday life. You can use this in your classroom through the use of group work, theory testing, and critical thinking exercises. After all, what good is an idea or a theory that hasn't been tested? Give your students this opportunity. Emotional reflection. Learning requires a resolution of dialectically opposing models of adaptation to the world. That is, learners must move between opposing modes of reflection and action, and feeling and thinking. Kolb believed that conflicts and disagreement, both internally and externally, drive the learning process. When learning, the student has to consider multiple points of view and make a decision based on their previous experiences or inclination. Without this struggle, there will be no progress in learning. How can you use this in your classroom? Well, allow students time to reflect. Have them keep journals. Encourage greater content and interaction both in and outside of the classroom. For instance, perhaps you're teaching a class on the Civil War. Encourage your students to actually look at their own family histories and what ties they have to it. This can help create a more personal attachment to the content. Holistic learning. Remember that learning affects the entire learner, the entire student. Kolb believes that it's not simply a cognitive process we need to concern ourselves with, but also how the student behaves, thinks, feels, and perceives. It's an entire person. For instance, if you're teaching a class on economics, that's a great time to bring out some mathematical formula. If you're teaching a class in history, focus quite a bit on how the student's reading level is. See if you can encourage some English in there as well. Remember that as educators, we have a greater responsibility than teaching just our content. We're not just training experts in our field, but entire human beings. Environmental. Learning involves the interaction between the learner and the environment. The learner does this by merging new experiences into established concepts the learner has already experienced. This allows the learner to grow and adapt to new experiences. Students may see the same event differently based on a previous experience they've had in the past. Even if two people are standing in the same room, staring at the same painting, they may see something completely different. To use this in your classroom, allow time for experimentation and application of the learner's ideas. Remember, there are many students who learn through trial and error, or, as we say, just getting our hands dirty. Give them a chance to dive in and see what they're made of. Constructivism. We've already mentioned this in the presentation, but it is Kolb's last principle, and of course, as he's such a devoted fan of it, perhaps his most important. Knowledge is constantly building upon itself. This is very valuable in your classroom. Account for differing viewpoints between students. Each learner's experience is constantly growing and creating a unique lens for that student. Their worldviews are very different. This is special because it creates diversity in your classroom, and with a multitude of ideas, you can create an inclusive and wondrous learning environment. Now that we have the 6 principles, we're ready to actually see Kolb's theory. Kolb's theory has no set beginning, but we will begin looking at Kolb's theory by analyzing the concept of concrete experience. This step of learning is trying or doing something. It doesn't matter what you tried or if it was successful. Perhaps you tried to make muffins without a recipe, or perhaps you tried to play baseball for the first time. It doesn't matter if it was successful or if you were apprehensive about it. You stepped up to the challenge and tried something. This is a concrete experience. After the concrete experience comes the reflective observation stage. It involves the learner taking a step back and reflecting on the experience they had. How did those muffins turn out? Too sweet? Too much flour? And how was that baseball game? Did you enjoy it? This step is very important as it helps to solidify the experience in their memory. Being based on constructivist ideology, this stage allows the learner to file that experience away with whatever emotion the memory conjures. It's an important step for future recollection of that experience. Next, we take a step into the abstract conceptualization stage. This stage allows the learner to critically think about the experience and how it may have been improved. Perhaps you should have included blueberries in those muffins, or followed a recipe you found online. Maybe you should buy a baseball glove for the next game you play. It would make it much easier than trying to field with your hat. By moving to this stage, the learner is able to think about the first experience in a theoretical way. This stage doesn't have to be outlandish or extravagant. It can be a total reformation of the learner's approach to the original experience, or a simple change to a single aspect. The last part of this 4-stage theory is the active experimentation stage. This is where the learner can actually test their abstract theories. The learner can repeat the original experience with a new approach. Try making those muffins again, with blueberries and cranberries. Buy that baseball glove and play another game. This gives the learner the chance to improve and create a new concrete experience. That's right, the theory has no end. It will continue to repeat itself and allow the learner to continue to improve their skills. After all, who can say that they've mastered every element of an activity? Even the great artists can learn something. Let's take a look at an example of this theory. Let's try some examples in an informal classroom. Learning to ride a bicycle. We'll start this time with reflective observation. The learner might watch another person ride a bike. This is a good step. They're observing someone else do it, and they might think, that looks pretty fun. I think I'll give it a try too. Next, they'll go through abstract conceptualization. They have to learn the theory of riding, how posture and speed help you stay upright. Maybe they need training wheels. Well, they at least have to think about it. How am I going to get started riding that bike? Next is the act of experimentation. They get a chance to get on that bike and give it an attempt to ride. Sure, maybe they fall and hurt themselves, but doesn't that lead to the concrete experience? They tried to ride the bike, and perhaps they failed the first time. I know I did when I was learning. That's the concrete experience, and this cycle can continue again and again until they're comfortable and able to ride that bike well. Another example might be learning to swim. We will begin with the reflective observation. The learner might enjoy watching other people at the pool and wish they could do the same. Next is the abstract conceptualization. The learner will try to understand how swimming works and the mechanics of it. Then comes active experimentation, and that involves getting in the water and testing it out. Was it fun? Did it work? Well, that's your concrete experience. The learner tried, gave it their all, and whether it was for good or for ill, they have something that they can plan their next swimming escapade on. Encouraging learning with Kolb's theory. Let's talk about how each of these 4 steps can be used in your classroom, with examples of each stage. Concrete experience. Examples of concrete experience include reading assignments, observations, games, and problems. As long as knowledge is obtained through trial or reading, it counts as concrete experience. This is an excellent way to start a lesson. In my own classroom, I prefer to start off my students with prerequisite reading so they have a background to build upon. Then, the subsequent stages have a better foundation. Reflective observation. Examples include journals, discussions, open-ended questions, and group assignments. Have your students recall the concrete experience and examine how it affected them. Group work is wonderful here, as each student may have a different experience with the initial material. Some of my greatest experiences in the classroom have been observing students work together to break apart a reading assignment with viewpoints they could not have come up with individually. Abstract conceptualization. Examples include building models, writing theoretical papers, projects designed to fix what they discovered in the reflective observation group discussions, or even action plans for their eventual experiment. This stage is useful to build critical thinking and planning skills with your students. Use the time to encourage your students to take part in detailed planning before taking part in the experimentation. Active experimentation. These are projects, experiments, role-playing, and simulations, getting the students to try what they've learned, drawn out, and theorized in person. The results are often rewarding both for instructor and learner. Remember that since the theory never has a true ending, this experimentation stage will eventually become a concrete experience. How does this affect adult learners? Learning may begin at any stage of the cycle and is a continuous process. As we mentioned, it doesn't necessarily have to have a beginning or an end, as they will continue to try and master the skills. Look again at the 4 different stages: concrete experience, reflective observation, abstract conceptualization, and active experimentation. Depending on where you start to learn something, will influence what kind of learner you are. Let's talk about the learning styles Kolb developed. There are four basic learning styles that Kolb came up with. First are the assimilators. Next, the convergers, accommodators, and finally, the divergers. These learning styles are pulled from Kolb's experiential learning theory. They focus on which of these stages each type of learner specializes in. Let's go into each one and see how the learning styles affect each type of learner. Assimilators. Abstract, reflective. They prefer to think and watch. They're excellent at pulling information together. They like to design models and frame ideas. This learning style encourages theorists. Examples of occupations that tend to fall under the assimilator learning style include economists, sociologists, and even physicists. Assimilators prefer to reflect on an experience and then theorize how it could be changed. They tend to be more interested in the possibilities of the knowledge than in the people the knowledge or problem affects. While assimilators like to create new ideas, they also care about what the experts think, and they're very critical about this information. This is where they become highly detail-oriented, as it helps to improve their own theories in the future. If you are the type of learner who prefers to see the forest rather than each individual tree, the big picture kind of person, you may just be an assimilator. Next, we have convergers. Abstract, active. They prefer to think and do. They prefer a practical use for the knowledge, as in, tell me what I need to know now. They're problem solvers, decision makers. They prefer technical problems over personal problems. Convergers like to view information in an abstract way, but unlike assimilators, they prefer to take action on that abstract thought. Convergers are doers and quick thinkers. They like to integrate theory into practice. They dislike fuzzy ideas. They like the facts and they like to use them quickly. They tend to thrive in skill-oriented professions, and they love experimentation. Often, convergers prefer to think on their feet and are more interested in the problem than the emotions of the people it may affect. Two examples of converger occupations are nursing and engineering. Both have to think abstractly and quickly, usually on their feet. Accommodators. Active, concrete. They like to feel and do. Excellent adapters, masters of trial and error. They prefer to act, then reform. Accommodators are perhaps the best at trial and error. They prefer to jump in and test the waters. They also tend to be good with working with others and can adapt quickly to new situations. Accommodators trust their instincts and act intuitively. Typically enthusiastic about trying new things, they have a reputation of being risk takers, which usually works out in their favor, as they are so adaptable and flexible. Some example of accommodator occupations include teaching and business. Finally, we have divergers. Divergers are concrete and reflective. They prefer to feel and watch. They prefer new ideas and approaches to problems. Divergers like to brainstorm and work well with others. They learn best by working in groups and observing. Divergers tend to be imaginative and are interested in the people the problem might be affecting. Since they spend so much time reflecting on concrete experience, they tend to take previous experiences they've had in high regard. They also are generally more self-aware than the other learning types. Example occupations are those in English, history, or political science. Now that we've covered the 4 learning styles, how do you learn? Please take a moment to look at the chart below and see where you fit in. How would you design a lesson for someone else with your learning style? How would you design a lesson for someone who isn't in your learning style? Perhaps the opposite. Let's talk about each of the learning styles and how we might actually go about building those lessons. Using Kolb's learning styles, let's look at some examples that we can use in our own classroom. We will look at all 4 learning styles again: assimilators, convergers, accommodators, and divergers. Assimilators. Remember that assimilators prefer to think about the problem and pull in extra information to theorize new possibilities. An example lesson aimed at assimilators might be designing a model building in a local area. Have students collect zip code information, research building materials, construction costs, and develop plans to implement all without exceeding an imaginary budget. Assimilators will excel in designing theoretical possibilities. Convergers. Remember that convergers prefer to think and then take action. Since they are problem solvers, they are better suited for technical problems. An example might be a computer coding assignment. Purposely design faulty code and present it to the students to have them fix. Convergers will excel in this environment and appreciate the challenge. Accommodators. You may recall that accommodators are great adapters and masters of trial and error. Thus, provide a challenge that can be approached from several different directions. Accommodators are notoriously creative and can make extravagant presentations. Designing lesson plans or slideshows would be an excellent challenge for an accommodator. You may recall before that accommodators are often teachers. This is excellent because they are also good at working in groups. Perhaps have an entire group come up with a lesson plan and have them present them to the rest of the class. Divergers. Divergers prefer to work in groups and brainstorm. Thus, create a group challenge with a hefty workload. Divergers will band together and delegate as necessary. This has more than one application in your classroom. It encourages knowledge attainment and reinforces social participation. An example might be tasking the group with a research paper on a historical topic, or perhaps asking the group to write an imaginary amendment to the Constitution. Let's review. Today, we've discussed the importance of constructivism and how experience becomes knowledge and it shapes our worldview. We've looked at Kolb's experiential learning theory and how each experience builds upon itself through reflection and critical thinking on behalf of the learner. And finally, we've looked at Kolb's 4 learning styles and how they affect not just how we learn, but how we approach problems. Thank you for watching this presentation. If you'd like to know more about Kolb's theories or seek other information provided in this presentation, please use the references provided.